Hi and welcome back to Sumatra on Bass. I hope that everyone is well and healthy at this time. I'd like to thank everybody for all the questions and comments. It's really important to me because it gives me an idea of what people are thinking, and as I've always said on this channel, the stuff that I use and the stuff that I talk about is my personal opinion of something, so it doesn't at all mean that you have to have the same opinion as I do. It's just up for discussion, right? And people have different ideas about different things, different uses for different things. Today I wanted to revisit the Alembic F-1X preamp. Nuke 97 sent me a message and said, can we have a bit more of a look at how it works and the tonal options? So what I've done is I've put in a few common settings and a graphic representation of those settings so you can see what's going on with the EQ, roughly anyway, on the screen. And it's worth remembering that because these controls are interactive, and what that means is that with a lot of settings, like the mids are cut only, bass and treble are boost only, and then what happens is as you cut the mids, the Q of the mids, of the wave, just tends to sort of narrow down. It gets narrower as it cuts, and the frequency can shift a little bit, and that yields slightly different tones. Now, it's not the kind of tone machine where you get radical changes in the sound when you turn the knobs. The bass will give it more thickness, the treble will give it more brightness, the mids will give it more of that mid-range detail, but you don't get the massive changes that some people expect from those type of tone controls. So it's a good preamp if you like clean, tubey sort of warmth in the sound, and that's enough for you. If you want radical EQ, you're probably looking at something else. So it's not for everyone, but for the sake of answering Nuke 97's question, let's have a quick look at some of the settings and see what they sound like. The first setting is 1-10-0, which is bass, mids, treble respectively, and that's probably as close as I could get it to a flat tone. It rolls off the low bass very slightly, as you'll see on the curve, but it still has a reasonable good sound. Let's have a listen to that. The next setting is slightly different, and it's 2-10-2, which is what Alembic sort of calls flat. I think it has a tiny bit of a scoop in the middle. You can see on the graph it's a very wide scoop of the mids, so it's not narrow at all. Let's have a listen to that setting. Now with a setting of 5-0-4, you can definitely see that the mids is cut a long way, and you can see that the Q of the mids has narrowed now considerably between the bass and the treble settings. Let's have a listen to that. if you're after a warm tone and a warm sort of setting, 442 is quite commonly used amongst people. It rolls the treble off ever so slightly from being too bright, and that would depend on the instrument that you're playing. So perhaps on a P bass you may want that treble a little bit higher. On a jazz bass with EMGs, 2 kind of takes the edge off it a little bit on the treble. Let's have a listen to that. Now, 444 across the dial is one of the most commonly used settings by people. It gives a good all-round tone. It gives you a little bit of a scoop in the mids, some nice bottom end, some nice bright top without being harsh. And this is my starting point usually for when I'm setting it up live to getting a good tone in the room. So if it's too boomy, I'll roll the bass back a little bit. If it's too bright, I'll roll the treble back a little bit. And sometimes I find myself reaching for a little bit more mids, so I might bump it up from 4 to about 5 or 6, and that fills it in nicely. But let's have a listen to the setting at 444. Now, a setting of 572 is going to give you quite a thick sound. One thing you notice about these controls is with the bass and the treble, you don't have to go very far to get a lot of difference. And generally in the range of 3 to 5 is probably where I would use the bass control, and from about 2 to about 5 for the treble control. Beyond that, it gets very, very bassy, which you may want, but and the treble gets rather bright after about 5 or 6. So I'd never use it up in the top of its range, if that makes sense. But let's have a listen to that setting now. The setting of 523 gives you a boosted bass, some fairly scooped mids. Let's see what that sounds like. Now, quite often you're using a 3-band preamp and you turn the bass and treble to 0 and bump the mids up to 10, you expect to hear a honky mid sound. But because the Q gets wider as you bump up the mid and lower the bass and treble, you actually hear a lot more frequencies just from the mids than you would expect. Then when you roll in a little bit of bass, you'll find that the thickness of the sound starts to really fatten up and give you that girth that you're looking for. So this is what I mean by it's very, very hard to get a bad tone out of this unit, because it may not be perfect at a lot of settings, but it still sounds musical, and that's the critical part of this EQ, is that it's a very, very musical thing. It's not as aggressive as some other preamps, but it does sound really, really good. Well, Nuke 97, I hope this helps to answer your questions. As you can see, you don't get drastic changes in tone, the basic tone of the unit, from tweaking those controls, but it does affect all those frequencies, and the bass control can get really, really thick, and the treble control can get really, really sharp. So I don't use those to their extremes. Nothing beyond 5 or 6, to be honest, and probably a little less for the bass control at 4 or 5. The mids, as you cut it back, narrows down, and you get a different sort of tone or effect from it. But anywhere you set it, it's quite musical. And as you can see, that when you set the bass and treble off and the mids to 10, you still get a reasonable sound. You add a little bit of bass and it still sounds like a bass guitar. It doesn't sound like a nasally effect. It actually sounds quite good. Thanks ever so much for spending this time with me. I hope this video has helped you get a better understanding of the interactive tone controls on the Alembic F-1X. As ever, stay safe, stay well, keep playing bass, keep making music. God bless, and I'll see you all at the next video.